Welcome to It's All Geek to Me, a podcast where two friends experience popular nerdy franchises for the first time. Today, we are doing a special bonus episode between seasons. I'm your host, Leah, and together with my co-host, Kelly, we will be watching The Princess Bride for the very first time. So let's dive in.
Welcome everybody to a special episode of It's All Geek to Me. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. As you know, we just wrapped up our first season where we watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy for the first time. And we asked you guys on Twitter what we should do in between seasons because we wanted something like a little bit more fluffy.
Lighter.
Yeah, a little lighter. So you guys voted for us to watch The Princess Bride for the very first time. We're actually going to watch the full movie in today's episode. It's a nice extra long episode and we're going to talk about it. So what makes this episode a little bit more special is last time when we watched The Lord of the Rings, I was watching it for the first time and my co-host Leah was our resident expert. But this time, neither of us have seen the movie and we have no idea what it's about.
Absolutely no idea. I feel like
not a clue.
When we were discussing sort of what two movies we were going to put up on the Twitter poll, when you said The Princess Bride, I thought of two movies in my head. I thought of The Runaway Bride and The Princess Diaries. And both of those movies, I'm pretty sure, are fairly modern times. So I thought in my head, like, how is this movie going to fit into our podcast? But I did look it up.
Yeah.
I didn't read anything about it. I just kind of wanted to look at pictures. And it does look like it's in some sort of fantasy, Renaissance, medieval, one of those. Yeah. So I was pretty pumped about that. And the fact that I think it's a love story. And I know how much you love love stories.
I love love.
Yeah, so it could be a fun one. I'm excited.
Yeah, I've actually been told by a lot of listeners of this podcast that we should watch The Princess Bride. Everyone says that it's like the movie of their childhood, and apparently we're missing out. So I also don't know how this is related to what we usually watch.
Yeah, me neither.
It's kind of giving The Princess Diaries for me. So I guess we'll see if it's like that. But why don't we start off by talking about what we know. So Leah, what do you know about The Princess Bride?
I know very, very little. Like, there's only one thing that I know about this movie, and I know I'm going to say it wrong just because I have zero context with it. But when I was younger, I used to watch a TV show where the son on the television show was obsessed with The Princess Bride. Like, it was his favorite movie. And he always used to say, like, the one line from it, which is, like, I'm Indigo Montoya, and I'm going to kill you.
Oh, you killed my father.
Yes, that's it.
Prepare to die. I have seen that. That's a meme. Well, it's not a meme. It's like a reaction GIF I've seen where it's like, my name is Indigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Okay. So yeah, that sounds more like the quote. So I've actually never seen the GIF or anything. I've only heard like the little kid on the TV show say it. I'm not like 100% sure what the show even was. I think it was Weeds with
I never saw it.
that actress.
I can't help you there.
Weeds was a show that I watched when I was in like high school and college. And I would say I'm 99% sure that it was that film and the little kid, like her youngest son, was obsessed with The Princess Bride and would always say that line. Yeah, that's the extent of my knowledge. That is all I have for you.
I would argue that I know even less than you because I have seen that meme before. My name is Indigo or whatever. I don't know if that's what it is, but I've only seen it written. I've never heard it said out loud, but I have seen that. I didn't know that it was from The Princess Bride. So I don't know at all what this movie is about. I have zero context. The name doesn't even sound familiar to me. Like when I think of The Princess Bride, I'm just thinking of The Princess Diaries.
Yeah, exactly. No, same. When you said it, I was like, oh, The Princess Diaries. I don't understand why we're watching this movie.
I'm confused, but everyone's saying we should do it, so we are going to watch it. But one of the rules of watching things for the first time is we have to make a prediction on what's going to happen.
Yes.
So do you have a prediction?
I do have some predictions, yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Give it to us.
I was definitely more excited about this film after looking at the pictures because it looks like up my alley. And I'm a little unsure of like where we are. Like, are we on Earth? Are we in a magical land?
Middle Earth.
Is it Middle Earth? Do the rules of our world apply, or will there be magic?
I would love to see some magic.
I'm hoping for some magic, some sort of fairy tale-esque things. I have to assume it's a love story, as I said before. But since Indigo is the only character that we know, I have to ask, is he the villain or is he the lover? You know?
Okay, so I don't think you've seen the GIF you said.
No, I haven't seen it.
But I will warn you, when I think of The Princess Bride, I assume that the main character, the Princess Bride, is going to be like a 13-year-old girl.
Okay.
The guy that says the I'm Indigo whatever, he's a grown man and he has like a whole mustache. So
he's got a mustache. Well, then he's definitely the villain.
Oh, okay. All villains have mustaches. Write that down.
Yes.
I would be horrified if he was the love interest. Not that he's, a bad looking guy, but this is a fully grown man. And people are telling me this is the movie of their childhood. And the movies that I remember from my childhood starred young main characters.
Yeah.
So I feel like she's going to be like a 13-year-old girl. And I think that this is going to be more of a political movie. I think it's going to be more about alliances, and the princess maybe has to marry somebody for political reasons.
But then she falls in love with like a young peasant boy or something like that. And she says, no, Dad, this is who I want to marry.
See, now you're starting to sound like me, and I just don't think that's the direction that we're going in.
Really? I don't know, because then maybe Indigo is like the guy she's supposed to marry, and then there's like some other guy that is like young and better looking.
I don't want to mislead you into thinking this guy is unattractive. I've only ever seen like a little tiny gif of him on Twitter. I just think he's older than what the main character is going to be. But don't think that he's like this old ugly man. He's a nice mustachioed man, He's a lovely gentleman.
I mean, I love a little facial hair, but when I think facial hair in a film like this, I just think villain.
It is a thin mustache, just so you know. So we're just basing this entire prediction off of
his mustache.
The character having a mustache.
And his age. He's too old to be the love interest, and his mustache points to villain.
But I don't even know what the Princess Bride looks like. So maybe she's old.
We don't even know her name.
Yeah, that's true. Do you have a prediction on her name?
On her name? Ooh, okay. I'm going to say her name is Violet.
Okay. My prediction is going to be Amora, because it sounds like love.
Amora.
And if you think this is a love story, I feel like she's going to have like a lovey name. Or maybe that's kind of like a hint that she wants love, but she has to marry for political reasons.
No, I agree with that. I definitely think that there's going to be like two people vying for her heart. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I never said that. That was you.
Oh, well, I was saying I'm right. I'm looking in a mirror. Leah, you're correct. Everything you're saying is right.
Oh, okay. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch the first half of the movie. Then we're going to come back, talk to you about what our predictions were, whether they were right or not. We're also going to predict what is going to happen for the second half of the movie. And then we'll come back after the movie and we'll talk about it. We'll see what happens. Also, I should mention, this is the first time that Leah and I are filming this podcast in the same state. So I actually just recently moved to Nevada, and a lot of people were wondering if we were going to end the podcast because I was moving across the country. But fun fact, Leah and I have actually never been together during the filming of these.
Nope.
We live in different states. Leah lives in New York. I used to live in New Jersey, and we would just do a little Skype call and we would watch each other's reactions and laugh.
Yeah.
But we're actually in the same state right now. So Leah is visiting me in Las Vegas, and we're going to be watching the movie together. But we do have a very strict rule. We're not allowed to talk to each other during the movie. We have to save all of our reactions and talk for the podcast only.
But it is pretty exciting to be together.
Yeah, it is exciting, isn't it? So we're going to go watch it. We will be right back in a couple of seconds, and we'll talk to you about the first half of the movie. So
see you in a bit.
In a second. Okay, we are back. So we watched the first 40-ish minutes of the movie, and it was not what I expected.
Should I start us off? I've never done it before. I've never narrated.
Actually, yeah, why don't you go ahead? Start us off, and if there's anything that you're missing, I take copious notes.
I took pretty good notes. I'm pretty excited. Yeah, I'm excited for you to see how well I'm going to do with this.
All right, why don't you start us off? How does The Princess Bride begin?
So it starts with the sound sound of coughing. It sounds like a young child coughing, but we don't see anything on the screen yet. And actually, the very first image that we see is a very old school, like 90s baseball video game.
Yeah.
And my very first thought was, did we turn on the wrong movie?
We weren't talking to each other, but we both started cracking up when that first scene popped up because we were like, wait,
what is this?
What?
Yeah. So you see this little baseball game and I say, okay, I'll give this 5 minutes and then we'll check and see if we put the wrong movie on. And it switches over to a little kid who I can only assume was the kid who was coughing. He must be sick.
He's playing that video game.
Yep. He's playing away at his baseball game.
And he is in a very typical 90s looking bedroom. I love it.
Bringing us back to our youth.
Yeah, seriously, the nostalgia.
So then the mom comes into the room and she asks him if he's feeling any better. He says that he isn't. And she tells him that his grandpa is there to visit. But the kid, he doesn't seem very excited to see grandpa.
He's like, Grandpa always pinches my cheeks.
Grandpa's always pinching my cheeks. Yeah, he says, just tell him I'm sick. I don't want him to pinch my cheeks. But then grandpa, bursts through the door. He comes in, he makes a grand entrance. He's wearing a suit. He's got a fedora on. And he kind of like dances his way into the room.
He's such a classy man.
And then, of course, the very first thing that he does, he comes over and pinches his cheek, just like the kid said he would. He looks up all upset at his mom. And then the mother leaves the room. Grandpa and child are alone together. And grandpa says, I brought you a gift. And the gift is a book, which is, what we know all kids love to get, a book.
I liked getting books when I was a kid.
I actually loved getting books too, but I don't think we were like cool kids, The cool kids wanted the video games.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, the kid is not too stoked about this book. And at this point, I assume that we are watching the correct film because I have to assume that the book is a fairy tale book and that The Princess Bride will be a story in the book. But the grandpa says, my father used to read this book to me when I was sick, and I used to read it to your father when he was sick, and so now I'm going to read it to you. Which then made me think that maybe his dad was dead, which made me sad.
I didn't think about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that grandpa has to read the story because like his dad might have passed, which was sad. But the kid doesn't care. He just says, does it have any sports in it? And grandpa says, no, it doesn't have sports. It has fencing and monsters and true love and torture. And he says a bunch of like mystical fairy tale
torture
things.
And killing and murder.
And he's like, no, I just want baseball. So, but he does convince his grandson, let me read this book to you. And then we are transported into a new world where we meet Buttercup and Westley.
Yes. So this is the story of The Princess Bride.
Yes.
So I do want to note really quick though that this grandpa is not old. Is this just a guy in his 40s that they dyed his hair gray for this role?
It did look like they sprayed his hair.
It did. It didn't even look like permanent dye. I don't think the guy is that old, and he's supposed to be looking like a stereotypical grandpa. And I was like, wait, I don't think this guy's even as old as Frodo.
He's definitely not even 50.
No, definitely not. This is like father age, and he's like, hey, old chap. I don't know. So I think that's why they like dressed him up in the fedora and stuff to make him look more old fashioned.
In that like tweed suit.
Yeah. Like he wasn't young, but he was not like an old grandpa age,
Yeah.
But anyway, why don't I take over a little bit for
the next scene? Yes.
The next little chunk, and then you can take it back.
I love that idea.
Oh, we're so good at this.
I'm a great narrator, right? I did a good job.
I do think you did a great job, but since neither of us have seen it, I feel like we'll just go back and forth between scenes.
Yeah, I think that's fun. We should switch off.
Okay,
I like it.
Cool. So let's dive into the actual fairy tale itself of The Princess Bride. So we meet the main character. Her name is Buttercup, so it's not Violet or Amora.
But okay, here's the question. Who was closer? Because you were closer alphabetically, but I was closer. Violet and Buttercup?
They're both flowers.
They're both flowers.
Yeah.
Everyone listening, go to Twitter and tell us who you think won this debate. Amora or Violet?
Yes, at All Geek Podcast. But I will argue, I was looking for a unique name, and I think Amora is closer in uniqueness to Buttercup. I don't know any humans named Buttercup, but I do know a horse named Buttercup.
I also know a horse named Buttercup.
Oh my gosh, do you think it's the same horse?
I don't know. I'll give him a call.
Oh, I don't have his phone number. So if we have any followers named Buttercup,
please let us know.
Also let us know on Twitter at All Geek Podcast.
Is your name Buttercup?
Yeah, is your name Buttercup? And also, which is closer to Buttercup, Violet or Amora? Because, a main character has to have an interesting name. I actually like the name Violet, but I think that Buttercup is pretty unique as far as names go.
We'll let the listeners decide.
Okay, fair. So we meet this main character. Her name is Buttercup. And the first thing we learn about her is that she loves to boss around this guy named Westley, and she always calls him Farm Boy. And let me tell you, both of these characters, very attractive. They're young, but they're not that. Like, they look like they're maybe in their 20s, but they're probably supposed to be like teenagers. So she bosses him around. She calls him Farm Boy, and she'll be like, Farm Boy, why don't you brush my horse? And he'll be like, as you wish. So all he says to her is, as you wish. And we find out very quickly that when he says, as you wish, he actually means, I love you, which we love to hear.
It was very corny, but very cute.
I love it. I live for this.
The way that they were looking at each other, you could just feel the tension coming out of their eyes.
There was some sexual tension there. Yeah, like she's bossing him around in like a flirty way, and he's like, as you wish.
As you wish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's already feeling a little sensual, and we love it. And there's one point where she realizes that she loves him back. So she calls him into her, I don't know, little cottage. So she's like, grab this pot for me. And they're standing very close.
I thought they were going to kiss.
I thought so too. And I was hoping for it.
Me too.
But so he reaches up, he grabs it, he gives it to her. They're like smirking at each other. But then immediately in the next scene, they're kissing in like the sunlight.
Yeah, it was very cute.
And then the kid interrupts. And we're back to this like 90s story where the kid is sick in bed. And he's like, Grandpa, is this a kissing book? And the grandpa's like, relax. Which I was furious.
I was
Let me tell you. 'Cause
too.
this is the spicy part. I want to be a part of this. But no, he's like, I don't want to be a part of this kissing book. And the grandpa's like, let me continue. It gets interesting. Don't worry. I already thought it was interesting.
And I have to say, I don't love the whole
narration
thing. I'm not really feeling it. Like, I feel like the film would be stronger if it wasn't there.
It feels like a very classic 90s trope to do that.
I agree with that.
But I feel like it usually ends with the person telling the story ended up being the love interest in the story or something like that. So maybe the grandpa is Westley?
He can't be Westley. Like, think about the time period. It's way too far back in time.
Yeah, but it could just be like an idealized version of it. I don't know.
Maybe he like idealized. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, this grandpa's only 40, so.
But no, every time that like the kid interrupted, I was like, oh my God, I forgot about you. Like,
every time the kid interrupted, I internally groaned. I was so annoyed.
Same. It was bothering me as well.
So anyway, back to Wesley and Buttercup. So they want to get married. Wesley wants to marry her, but he doesn't have any money. So he has to go earn some money so he can give her a nice wedding. So he sails off and his ship is attacked by pirates. So I think the guy's name was Dread Pirate Roberts. And we find out that Wesley is immediately murdered.
Yeah.
Which, can I tell you, so we did watch this together. We did make a rule not to talk to each other, but Leah gasped like in horror at this moment. We're like 5 minutes into this movie and Leah's like,
I did gasp.
Leah is a gasper, I found out, because this is a predictable movie so far. And Leah's like, oh my gosh, at every moment.
What?
I'm like, what are you doing?
So here's what I thought. I assumed that Wesley died.
Well, we were told that he died.
Yes.
So that's fair.
And I assumed it was true. Apparently, like, you didn't think he died like there?
I wasn't sure. I wasn't giving myself any preconceived notions.
Okay. Well, kind of what I thought was going to happen was it was going to be this thing where we got this like quick snippet of a love story. And then she vows like, oh, I'll never love again.
Which she does say.
And then later she'll like meet someone new who shows her how to love again. That's kind of what I thought was going to happen.
That's a different kind of movie.
Yeah, whatever.
But yeah, so anyway, so she does say, I'll never love again. And then we cut to 5 years later.
So 5 years later, Prince Humperdinck.
I know you loved this part because we were... His name, Humperdinck.
Humperdinck. And because I'm taking notes on my phone, I spelled it wrong and my phone auto-corrected and capitalized it. So my phone, certified fan of The Princess Bride.
Knew it was Humperdinck?
It did.
I wrote down Humperton at first, and then when I heard it again, I was like, oh, it's Humperdinck? And I was like, wait, this is a kid's movie.
Well, it's Humperdinck. There's an N
Humperdinck.
in there.
So we meet Prince Humperdinck.
I laughed when they said his name. I said, this isn't real. Like,
we were cackling.
I can't. But he arrives in the town, which we later find out the town is Florin, or the realm. I don't know if it's a town or a city or a realm, whatever. It's Florin.
But he definitely rules it.
He rules it. And he says that in a month is going to be the 500th anniversary. And on the 500th anniversary, he is going to marry a commoner. And the commoner, we find out, is none other than Buttercup, who 5 years ago vowed that she would never love love again.
But she doesn't look happy.
It's very clear, and in the narration they say it too, that she is marrying the prince. She doesn't love him, but she has to marry him because he chose her. At first I thought, I was like, ooh, is she maybe trying to like marry for some money? But then it is revealed that he actually has chosen her. He picked her. Yeah. She does not love him, but she's going to do it anyway. But at this point in her life, the only enjoyment that she finds is in riding her horse. And on one particular ride, she runs into 3 circus performers in the woods. And they ask her...
I'm cracking up already. This is a pretty funny movie.
And that actor I recognize, like the short one. He's like in everything.
The inconceivable guy. Yeah.
What's that from?
That's from this, I guess. I actually wrote that down because as soon as I saw him, I was like, oh, that's the inconceivable guy. Does he say that in other movies? Because I've never seen this.
I don't know. Like, I can't think of like what he's in.
Is he in Fairly Odd Parents? I know that's a very weird jump.
That is a cartoon.
But I'm pretty sure he says inconceivable. Maybe it's like a call out to it, you know? I've heard this man say inconceivable, and I have never seen this movie.
I just know I've seen him in like a million things, but I can't for the life of me think of one of them.
Same, 100%. Yeah. But yeah, so we got the 3 guys.
Yeah, the 3 guys in the woods, and they're, you know, they're saying they're circus performers. They're asking where the nearest town is, and she says, oh, you know, there's not a town for miles. And they say, well then, nobody will hear you scream or something like that. So they attack her. They're putting her onto a ship, and it's revealed that the shorter one, who is the leader, Vizzini, basically wants to kill her in Gildar so that Prince Humperdinck thinks that the Gildarians did it, and so that it will start a war between Florin and Gildar. The big guy in the group, so there's like big, medium, small. So big doesn't want to kill her. And the medium stature guy, I immediately was like, this is Indigo.
Yeah, I recognized him from the meme, so I was like, this is Indigo. Well, it turns out his name is actually not Indigo.
It's Inigo or Idigo?
I wrote it down. Hold on.
Inigo. It's definitely Inigo.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as soon as I saw him, based on your description of him, I was like, immediately, this is Inigo. And I think I'm wrong that he's a villain. Immediately, I got like good vibes from him. And honestly, like, I think he's kind of hot.
I knew that you would. That's why when you were like, oh, this evil mustachioed man, I was like, wait, but he's not like, he's not a hideous guy.
He's actually kind of good looking.
I personally don't love his vibe, his look, I mean, but I knew that you would like it.
Yeah, no, I was into it. So yeah, so of our 3 guys, we've got Vizzini, who's small, Fezzik, who's the big guy, and then Inigo, who's the middle guy. And they're putting her on the ship, and they are sailing to the cliffs where they plan to kill her.
Well, I also want to say, in the intros, we found out a little bit more about Inigo and Fezzik, because Fezzik, by the way, is like, he's a very large guy, like he's huge, and he doesn't seem to be the brightest.
I think he's a giant.
Yeah, they called him a giant, but I'm like, is this like a fantasy giant, or is he just being like disrespectful? I'm not sure. But he is a big guy. He said Inigo used to be a drunk. He was like so drunk he couldn't buy his own brandy or something like that.
Oh, I missed all of this, yeah.
And then Fezzik was sad because Vizzini was like ripping on him, and he was being so rude, and he was like, I didn't hire you for your intelligence. And then Fezzik's all sad, and Inigo comes up to him, and they start doing this little rhyming together, which cheers him up a lot. Yeah, and I was like, okay, this is adorable. These guys are just pals, and they're working for this very annoying guy, Vizzini.
Yeah, I think it was like pretty clear right away that Vizzini was evil, and the 2 of them were good guys.
Yeah, especially because when Vizzini is like, oh, we're gonna kill her, Fezzik's like, oh, wait, you didn't say anything about killing people. And he's like immediately not on board with it, you know?
Yeah.
So then a boat seems to be following them. There's a little bit of a boat in the distance. I don't know how you can be a little bit of a boat, but there is a boat in the distance. Then Vizzini's like, inconceivable, which I was like, oh, that's the guy.
That's the thing. He said
He says it like 80 times during this movie. So I was like, okay, this isn't the best, but whatever. It was kind of funny. It was funny at first, then it stopped being funny, and then it started getting funny again. But we'll talk about it more. Then they have the princess just on the boat. She's not even tied up. She's just sitting there. So she's kind of mouthing off at them, and Vizzini's like not on board with it. They realize that the boat is catching up, and then Buttercup jumps into the water, and she's trying to escape. Vizzini's like, somebody jump after her, and he goes like, oh, I don't swim. And Fezzik is like, oh, I only doggy paddle, which I don't see how that's an excuse, but I mean, I'm on board with it, so whatever. Then Vizzini's like, oh, by the way, there's shrieking eels in that water, so if you come back, we won't hurt you, but the eels aren't going to extend the same courtesy, which I thought was very ironic, because the eels were waiting to kill her to see, I guess, if she would swim coming back.
Yeah.
So that's when I was like, wait, this is a little unrealistic.
I was also gasping during this section too at the eels.
You were
I was like, oh, they look so scary.
She did gasp when the eel surfaced, which I was like, this is a very 90s looking eel.
I thought it was scary.
So the eels are waiting for some reason, and then finally one of them jumps up and he's like starts to like reach out with his teeth to bite her, and
we cut back to Grandpa.
Stops his story and he's like, oh, are you into the story? And the kid's like, you can tell us about it.
The grandpa cuts off and he says, oh, well, just so you know, like the eels don't eat her. And he was like, you looked really nervous, so I just wanted to tell you. And the kid was like, you can keep telling the story. So I think in that section of the story, it's supposed to show like, oh, the kid is finally interested and him and his grandpa are gonna bond. Cool. Back to the better story.
Yeah, and then there's like a weird little moment where the grandpa starts retelling it and the kid's like, you already told that part. So then he like fast forwards it a little bit. So I thought it was actually kind of funny. Grandpa
finally catches back up. Fezzik pulls Buttercup out of the water and she's back onto the boat. And now it's morning time. The boat is still following them, but they've made it to the cliffs, and the cliffs are called the Cliffs of Insanity.
And Leah is hyped because Leah loves climbing.
Yeah, I was like, oh, they're climbing. So Fezzik ties up the rope and he's got Buttercup, he's got Vizzini, and he's got Inigo on with him.
Here's a problem that I had almost immediately. Where did that rope come from?
I thought the exact same thing. Where did that rope come from?
Who tied the rope to the top of the cliff? How did it get up there?
Also, the way that they're climbing too is so unrealistic.
Bizarre. The fact that Vizzini was like a little baby kangaroo in front of him, and then we had Inigo on his side and the princess like wrapped around his back.
Yeah.
He's climbing so weirdly, but anyway, so then what happens?
So yeah, they're climbing, and then they see that a man in black starts climbing underneath them. And he's climbing fast, also extremely unrealistically.
But Fezzik does say, he's only one guy, and I've got 3 of you holding on to me, so it makes sense that he's going faster than me.
So Vizzini is like yelling at Fezzik. He's very mean. I don't like him at all. Yeah, I don't like him at all. He's yelling. He's like, you gotta go faster. You gotta go faster. So finally, they do get up. Like the 4 of them get up to the cliff, and Vizzini cuts the rope. But then they look over the ledge, and the man in black has grabbed onto the rocks, and now he's climbing up. So Vizzini orders Inigo, you have to stay and duel and kill this guy.
So Vizzini's like, inconceivable!
Again?
For the millionth time. Yeah, he says it again.
I literally didn't hear this one time.
He said it like 8 times in the first 40 minutes.
Oh my God.
Every time something happens, he says, inconceivable. And at one point, even Inigo is annoyed, and he's like, you keep saying that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. And that is something that pops up a lot on the internet, specifically as a response when people use slang. As far as I'm aware, people like use slang incorrectly, and people will respond with that gif that's like, you keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
I gotta look out for these. I'm sure I'm gonna see them all the time now.
So Vizzini tells...
Yes, he tells Inigo, you stay behind, duel, kill this guy, and we're gonna go ahead and kill the princess. So Inigo's like waiting.
One more thing. Sorry, I was just cracking up at this because Inigo's being very cocky because he's like, well, I'll fight him with my left hand. And Vizzini's like, well, why would you do that? And he's like, because otherwise it's not fun for me.
Yeah, like if I do it with my right hand, it'll be too fast. Yeah, I forgot about that. I remember that.
It was a pretty cocky moment, and for a second I was like, geez, you're so annoying. But actually, it's justified because as we find out later, he has a lot of experience.
He's not nervous at all. He's just waiting for the man in black to get up there. And he looks over and he's climbing like really, really slow. And they kind of start talking to each other. And at this moment, this was when I knew who the man in black was, like immediately. So I'm not that gullible of a watcher, Kelli. I picked up on it pretty quickly that this was Westley.
Yeah.
And he's got a new thin mustache and he's wearing a mask.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, he does. But we know who this guy is. He calls out to him. He's trying to talk to him. And the man in black says, please don't distract me while I climb. Which is so funny because before he was just like climbing a rope like it was so easy. But now that he's on rocks, all of a sudden he like can't climb anymore.
Struggling.
Yeah, this doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So he does ask him. He says, well, this will get sped up a little bit if you drop a rope. Yeah. So he drops down the rope and he climbs time's up.
And Inigo's also like, well, it's going to be weird because I am just waiting to kill you. And he's like, well, you can promise not to kill me. And then they like have a little back and forth where he's like, well, what if I promise as a Spaniard? And Westley, we know it's Westley. I'm sorry for the spoiler. And he's just like, well, I still don't trust you. And he's like, well, what if I promise on my father, Domingo Montoya? And at this point, Leah's gasping again because she's so excited.
Because at this point, like I'd been writing in my notes, I've been writing Indigo. And then as soon as he said Domingo Montoya, I was like, Kelli, it's him. And she's like, yeah, they've been saying it in the subtitles. Like it's been saying it the whole time. And I said, what? I did not notice that.
But I did find out pretty quickly that his name is Inigo.
Inigo, not Indigo.
From the subtitles, not from him saying his name. But yeah, so then Westley finally agrees. So he accepts the rope and Inigo's like, I promise I won't kill you until you get to the top. So then he pulls him up and Wesley is out of breath. And Inigo's like, oh, take your time, like whenever you're ready. So Wesley sits down on a rock. He takes off his boots and he's like shaking the sand out of them. And Inigo sits with him and he's like, oh, do you happen to have 6 fingers? And Wesley's like,
no.
What?
It's like, do you start every conversation this way?
Yeah. And Inigo's like, oh, my dad was killed by a 6-finger man. His name was Domingo Montoya and he was a sword maker. And then he shows Wesley his sword and he's like, this was a sword that a 6-fingered man commissioned, but then he didn't agree with the price. He wanted to pay 1/10 of the price and my dad refused. So then he stabbed him in the heart. And we find out that Inigo fought off this man.
Well, I think what happened was he challenged the man to a duel to the death. And Inigo was 11 years old at the time. And he lost the duel. But the man did not kill him. He gave him just 2 scars on his face.
So then he said, it's been 20 years he's been practicing his sword fighting. And then he says the meme. He says when I see him, I'm going to say, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. But he didn't say it as enthusiastically as I would have assumed based on the meme.
Well, I think he's probably going to say it again. We have to assume he's going to meet the 6-fingered man at some point.
I actually didn't consider that at all.
Wait, really? I feel like that's going to be like the plot B of this whole story.
You think? Mm-hmm. So then he basically just admits that he works with Vicini for money. And then he's like, well, you seem like such a nice guy. I would hate to kill you. And Wesley's like, yeah, you seem like a nice guy too. I would hate to die. But then they're like, all right, we'll start fighting. So then they start fighting, but they're reluctant. They're obviously not thrilled about it, but they're sword fighting, they're bantering. They really enjoy each other's fighting style. Yeah. And they're pretty evenly matched. And then Inigo's like, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, I'm actually not left-handed. And then he switches to his right hand and he basically bests Wesley. And then Wesley's like, oh, wait, I forgot to tell you, I'm also not a lefty.
Oh,
and then he switches. And Leah's gasping again in shock.
I appreciated this fight. Like when they switched hands, I kind of was thinking, in modern movies and stuff, it's all about the fast cuts and like swinging around the camera and getting the close-ups. But this was like pretty much one shot the entire time.
Yeah, it was skill-based.
It felt like almost like a play, that they were really focusing on the swordsmanship.
The movements, yeah. So they're fighting and at one point Wesley throws down his sword and he does this little gymnastics moment on a very convenient pole. And Inigo is like, who are you? And Wesley says, no one of consequence. And Inigo's like, I must know. And he says, get used to disappointment. And I thought that was actually pretty funny. So I wanted to write down that little quote. So
I liked that quote too.
The fight continues. And one thing I actually noticed is that they kept switching the hands that their swords were in. So they were just really proving to each other and basically just enjoying the fight for what it was. Because I mean, obviously, if they were planning on trying to actually kill each other, they would have been using their best hand. But I did notice that they were switching back and forth a little bit.
And I think in general, it showed that they had some respect for each other, especially in the way that like Inigo waited to fight. He said, catch your breath before you fight with me. Like they are very honorable men,
Yeah, they're playing fair. But anyway, so Inigo eventually loses and he's like, just kill me fast and be done with it. And he's like, oh, I don't want to kill you, but I do have to knock you out. So then he like hits him on the back of the head with his sword, knocks him cold. And then he starts running after the princess. And then we cut back to Vicini and he's like, inconceivable again. because he is just shocked that Inigo lost that sword fight. And then he says to Fezzik, he's like, kill him. I'm taking the princess. I'm running. And they have a little back and forth where he's like, kill him. And he's like, how? And he's like, oh, however you want. And Fezzik's like, I don't know what to do. And then he's like, hide behind a boulder, throw a rock at his head and kill him. And he's like, that's not very sportsmanlike. So he's like a little bitter about it. He's not thrilled. And then Westley is running through and a rock gets thrown. It hits a nearby rock and it shatters. And then Fezzik runs out and he's like, I didn't hit you on purpose, by the way. Like, I feel like that would have been unsportsmanlike. So I want to make this a fair fight. And Westley is like, so you want to fight with your hands? Like, how do you want to do this? And he's like, you put down your sword. I'll put down my rocks. We'll just fight each other. And he's like, well, you're a little bit bigger than me. So this isn't ideal for me. But he agrees. And at this point, I wrote down this movie is very cute because I like the way that they're like having conversations before they get into
the battle.
These deadly fights. Yeah, it's cute. So then they're fighting and Fezzik is like, why are you wearing a mask? Are you burned or something? And I thought that was hilarious. And then Westley is like, oh, they're terribly comfortable. I think everyone will be wearing masks in the future. And I was like,
yikes.
That aged, well, it aged accurately. Then Fezzik is actually struggling and he's like, well, I actually specialize in fighting a bunch of people at once, like gang members and stuff. And Wesley's like, well, how does that make it any easier? And he's like, well, it's just easy because you can do different moves and stuff, but it's hard to focus on just one person. And while he's kind of trying to defend himself, you know, verbally, he is being squeezed around the neck by Westley and then he just passes out.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
And then he continues on and I just wrote, I'm assuming the inconceivable is coming. We also cut really quickly to the prince. Yeah, so he's here too. He manages to piece together absolutely perfectly exactly what happened. So he's like, there was a sword fight here. One man lost. He was knocked out. He ran away. So then we cut back to, actually, I knew what was going to happen in this scene. I don't know why I knew this. I might have seen this scene randomly in like a class or something, but I did know what was going to happen in this scene. So I'm a little sad that I knew what would happen with the poison, but I do want to hear your perspective. So I feel like you should tell this part.
Yeah, sure. We just saw the prince. He's kind of like running after them. And now Westley arrives to where Vizzini and the princess are, and they're like sitting at a table. Like they're going to
it's like a
dine or something. Yeah, it was weird. Yeah. And Vizzini is holding a knife to her neck. And Vizzini says that there's no way that he could beat Wes in a competition of brawn.
I like that you already gave him a nickname. I love that.
Because it was so hard to write his whole name. Yeah. I'm just like reading my notes. Wes.
Yeah. All right. We'll call him Wes from now on.
Wes,
I like that.
Yeah, it's cute. We're friends now. We got a nickname for him. So he says, Vizzini says he definitely cannot beat him in a battle of brawn, but that he's smarter than him. And as soon as he said that, I said, I don't believe that for a second.
Pompous of him and also incorrect.
Westley says, I will challenge you to a battle of wits to the death. He pulls out this little vial and he gives it to Vizzini to inhale. And at first I was like, well, you've immediately lost the battle of wits. When people give you something to sniff, you don't sniff it.
That would have been hilarious.
Well, because then he says, you know, you smelled a poison. It doesn't have any scent or taste. I thought he was going to just die right then and there. Like I was like, oh, well, that was over. Yeah. Rule of thumb. When someone says, hey, sniff this, don't sniff it.
Although I wouldn't argue that it's usually poison. I would argue that it's usually fart, but go on.
Here's a bottle of farts. Smell it. But anyway, that wasn't what happened. But he does say that it's a poison and he takes the two chalices that are on the table. He brings them behind his back and we assume, pours poison into one of the chalices, brings them back to the main table and he says, where is the poison? Which glass is poisoned? There's one glass in front of Vizzini. There's one in front of Westley. And now he has to choose which glass he's going to drink from.
And also the princess is just sitting there.
Yeah, she's like saying nothing.
She does not care. She's not trying to escape at all. She's blindfolded, but she's just sitting there. But I am curious because I know he goes on the whole tirade of what he thinks.
It was like so hard to follow of like, well, I can't have the glass in front of you because of this, but I also can't have the glass in front of me, but I also can't have the glass in front of you. And then Wesley is like, you're stalling.
And then he says the weird thing like, I don't trust Australians and this poison is from Australia.
Oh yeah, this is from Australia and they're all criminals.
But I'm curious at this point, which glass did you think had the poison in it?
I wasn't really thinking too much about that. I don't know. Like, part of me was thinking that neither one of them were poisoned.
Okay.
But I don't know. I didn't really have like a strong position either way of which one it was going to be.
That's inconceivable to me, honestly.
Inconceivable. But I was like enjoying the conversation, especially like the way that Westley was responding to him, because he says like, you're trying to get me to reveal something. And Vizzini says, oh, well, you have revealed something. I know everything I need to know. Look over there. And then Westley turns around. He switches the glasses. And at that point, I knew that the poison was going to be now in front of Vizzini, because there's no way that like Westley fell for that. I don't know. Like, I don't know which one I thought it was going to be in front of, because like in the end, we find out that both were poisoned, and Westley has somehow trained himself to be immune to this poison.
Yeah, he's built up his immunity.
Which
so
makes no
this
sense.
was another meme part. And this is actually something that Ryan says a lot. I am discovering through this podcast that Ryan quotes a lot of movies I have not seen, because he said, Vizzini, after he drinks it, he's like, ha, I knew it. You fell victim to one of the most classic blunders.
And then he dies.
And then he immediately just dies.
Thank gosh he died. I was so annoyed with him. I was over Vizzini.
Yeah, and then we find out that Westley has been slowly giving himself that poison to build up immunity. And I did know this part, like I said.
Yeah, you
But
knew.
I have also, beyond this scene, I have also heard of this technique in other stories. So I don't
okay.
know if this originated from The Princess Bride, or if this is like some sort of retelling of a popular story, like which glass has the poison, and then one of the people has built up an immunity to it. But as soon as it started, I was like, oh, they're both poison, and he just is immune.
I obviously knew that Westley was going to survive and Vizzini was going to die, but like in
that
my
would've been
head,
crazy if Westley just
Westley
died.
died and then like Vizzini's the new suitor, or maybe Inigo would be the new suitor. Anyway, that's not what happened, so I'll put that aside. But Westley runs off with the princess. We cut back to the prince, and now he's at the scene where Fezzik was fighting with Westley, and again he just very easily and accurately describes what happened. And I think at this point he did say something too, that he thinks that whoever has her is from Gildar.
So it is actually kind of working.
I don't know why Vizzini wanted there to be a war, but he wants there to be a war. Doesn't matter, he's dead, but it is happening. So that's cool. But now Westley and Buttercup are together, but she doesn't recognize him. That's crazy.
And some terrible stuff happens.
And is said, yeah.
I was getting upset.
Yeah, I was too, yeah.
She's like, oh, like, we'll pay a ransom, just please don't hurt me. And he's like, you're a woman. I don't trust you. Which I was like, big yikes. Yeah, I didn't like that. And then she says some mean stuff to him because she doesn't recognize him. And she's like, oh, like, I knew love, but I'm not in love with the prince. And then he makes a move to backhand her, and she flinches, and he's like, that's a warning, by the way. And if you lie again, I'm going to slap you.
Yeah, I did not
Well, he
love
doesn't
that.
say that, but I was like,
Yeah.
ew, I do not like this at all.
I know. I was definitely getting really upset at that point. I was like, oh, I thought we were supposed to like him.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, didn't love the tactic, didn't love the writing there. Very clearly an aged movie. I think we find out later that his motivation behind that was he was upset that she
mad.
didn't wait for him or that she fell in love with someone else. But she very clearly says, like, I wasn't in love with him. But still, like, don't do that. Like, you shouldn't
That
ever
shouldn't
act this
ever
way.
be
No,
your
no, 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 no.
reaction. Yeah.
No.
So we're just both yikesing all over the place. We're not having a good time here. Yeah. So at this point, she's like, I know who you are, Dread Pirate Roberts. And then she's like, you killed my true love. He was a farm boy. And I was like, why isn't Westley admitting who he is? But then he turns around and he's like, oh, after I killed him, did you wait a week before you started hooking up with the prince or whatever? Which I'm like, oh my gosh, is this why he tried to slap you? Because is this what's going to happen every time they're in an argument?
And he was saying too, he said like, I remember your farm boy from 5 years ago. He died well, but he said, please, I need to live. And I asked him what was so important. And he said, my true love. But then here you are like a week after his death, just running off to the prince.
Yeah, which it wasn't even a week. It's been 5 years.
Yeah, and she didn't even have a choice in the matter. The prince was like, you must marry me.
Yeah, she didn't get to choose. I thought that was really disrespectful. And then she's like tearing up a little bit and he's like, oh, am I hurting your feelings? And she's like, you can't hurt me. And I don't remember what she said, but then she pushes him down a hill.
She says like, die. Like, I want you to die. And then he's like,
Yeah, go
as
die.
you wish. And she's like, oh, my sweet Westley, what have I done? And then she dives out.
She throws herself, which I was like, why wouldn't you just walk down the hill? But no. And then, so we get this long shot of both of them cutting back and forth, rolling down the hill like,
And I saw his mask came off as he was falling. So I was like,
his mask did come off. So then we cut really quick back to the prince, and he says they're headed to the fire swamp.
Yeah,
but then
scary.
we cut back to Westley and Buttercup. His mask is off, and then she's like, oh my gosh, it's you. And then they're hugging, and then she's like, I thought you were dead. And then he's like, death can't stop true love. They kiss.
He said, death can't stop true love, only delay it. I loved that line.
Oh yeah, I didn't even pick up on that because I was too busy gasping with excitement at their kiss. And then guess what happens? We get interrupted again.
Because he doesn't want to hear about the kissing. Well, you know what, kid? We want to hear about it.
I want to hear only the romance. I don't care about the fire swamp, but he asked
Me
about
neither.
the fire swamp. That is actually the point where we did take a break so that we could predict what's going to happen next. What happens with the fire swamp?
We thought that was a great place to end because
it was a complete guess.
it felt like a good place to end. Like Buttercup finding out that Wesley was still alive. We felt that was a good point to stop and catch up with you guys and give our final predictions for the film. But you know what, Kelly? Since you think this is such a predictable film and I am such a gasper, you predict first and I'll predict second.
Okay, so here's what's definitely going to happen. Basically, Westley, now that he is alive, wants to be with Buttercup. And I think that now Buttercup has to not marry the prince that she is betrothed to. And I don't think he's going to be on board with that. So she's probably going to be like, oh, he's my love. Please be kind to me and let me marry him. And the prince is going to be like, no, you were promised to me. He's a pirate and he's evil. And then he's going to be fighting Westley and they're going to have a whole epic battle to see what happens. And since that is probably not long enough to be the rest of the movie, I think you're right. There's probably going to be a moment with Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
And that'll probably be a good battle too.
But who is the six-fingered man going to be?
I don't know because like he's got to be old, you know, because
I was actually just thinking he's got to be the prince, but I guess he's not.
Think about this. Inigo was 11 when his dad was murdered. 20
yeah,
years
yeah,
later,
true.
he's 31. This has got to be like
Okay.
an old guy.
But I was also just thinking real quick, if Buttercup married the prince, her name would be Buttercup Humperdinck.
Wait, but is Humperdinck his last name or his first name?
If that's his first name, then that is some cruel parents. I would not be thrilled with my parents if they named me Humperdinck as a first name.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Humperdinck is a bad enough last name. I don't think I would marry somebody with the last name Humperdinck.
No, I definitely don't think.
And if anybody who's listening to the podcast is named Humperdinck, I am sorry, but you have to admit that it's a questionable first name.
It's a pretty funny name.
So what do you think is going to happen?
I mostly agree with your predictions, but when old Gramps was talking about the story, he mentioned torture. I haven't seen any torture yet.
He did say
I was
torture.
promised torture. So I think that the prince is going to have to probably capture Wesley and torture him. You know, I think that might happen.
Honestly, Westley low-key deserves it though.
For what he said to Buttercup.
Like, don't get me wrong. I'm very pro love in this story. And as a fictional story, I like the idea of them getting together. However, if you and I were hanging out and you were like, oh my gosh, I met this incredible person and we were fighting a little bit and he raised his hand at me, I would be like, never speak to him again.
Yeah.
Call the police, get a restraining order.
100%.
This is not a good guy. For the sake of a movie, I'll consider allowing it, but I need to see what happens because he needs to grovel.
I also think it's a very like outdated way of speaking.
That's
Like
true.
if this movie came out today with that
it wouldn't
scene,
have happened.
that would have been a no for me. But because it's older, I feel like
Yeah.
I'm willing to give it a little bit more of a pass.
All right, I guess I'll accept that. But seriously, I'm so mad at him and I'm mad at myself for rooting for them.
I know. I did not love that scene, but I'm willing to look past it for the film. But yeah, I think that Inigo is going to find this guy. And then I also think like the kid's going to be like, wow, I love fairy tales. Thanks, Grandpa. But like, I don't care about that story even a little bit.
And then the grandpa's going to be like, let's watch some baseball.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be like stupid. But I think that the Princess Bride is going to wrap up in a very wholesome way, I would assume.
Well, I mean, there's definitely going to be a happily ever after with
for sure.
Wesley and Buttercup.
Yeah.
We know that. Okay, well, let's go find out. So we will be right back in about 1 second.
To let you know how the movie ended. See you in a second. Did you think we were going to give you just one special episode? As Vizzini would say, you fell victim to one of the classic blunders. But in all seriousness, we thought splitting the movie into 2 sections would ensure that you got to hear all of our detailed thoughts and opinions. So come back next Thursday to finish up The Princess Bride on It's All Geek to Me. And as always, don't forget to give us a rating and follow us on Twitter at All Geek Podcast. See you next week.